welcome to the India Development Debate. I'm Nayantara Rai in New Delhi. Today, I think we were switching between London and Japan. So on one side, the World Cup, on the other side, the G20 summit in Osaka, Japan, as Prime Minister Narendra Modi met with the U.S. President Donald Trump at the sidelines. Both the world leaders held talks on a range of issues, including the big one, trade, the irritants around trade, as well as 5G communication networks, where India seems to not be taking the stance that the United States would want. Donald Trump congratulated Narendra Modi on his election victory. Remember, this is the first time the two heads of states have met since the general elections in India. This is so all eyes now on whether Prime Minister Narendra Modi and US President Donald Trump are able to iron out all the irritants like data localization, e-commerce, now 5G. Don't also forget H-1B visas. All of this just a day after Donald Trump struck an aggressive tone, calling for the withdrawal of retaliatory tariffs by India. That, of course, had been preceded by Piyush Goyal, the Commerce Minister, in Parliament on a day when the US Secretary of State Mike Pompeo was in New Delhi, saying the US-India relations have never been better, but no business will be at the cost of national interest. Let's take this forward with my panelists who are joining me this Friday evening. Pinnak Chakravarti, the former ambassador and visiting fellow at the ORF. Rupa Chanda, the RBI chair professor in economics at IIM Bangalore, as well as the former economist at the IMF. Suhasini Haidar, diplomatic editor at The Hindu, and Maruf Raza, consulting and strategic affairs expert. Thank you all for joining us this Friday evening. I'll come to you first, Ambassador Chakravarti. Yes, the India-US relationship perhaps has never been better. The Indo-US bonhomie, which perhaps was at its zenith during the era of Barack Obama and Narendra Modi. Since then, countries have started to look inward, and it all began with the US. Make America great again. There are a lot of trade irritants, whether it's H-1B, tariffs, data localization, India's stance on e-commerce. And how can we forget that going into the G20, the Reserve Bank of India, as well as the Commerce Minister, decided to reiterate India's stance when Mike Pompeo was in town, was in New Delhi. So having said that, when Donald Trump tweets about high tariffs, but then today says we will have a very big trade deal with India, how do you put all of this together?
I think a lot of messaging is going on at the moment. And because no deals have been made at the G20, nor during Pompeo's visit to Delhi. So I think a lot of messaging is going on. The Americans have taken certain steps which have had a negative impact on India. The withdrawal of the GSP, then the threat of sanctions, then forcing us in a way to reduce oil imports from Iran. So I think on these three things, I think India has compromised on the Iran thing, and we have reduced our oil imports because on that we have flexibility. We can import from other countries. We are even sort of trying to import more from the US. So I think on that and on trade issues, there are flexibilities. But on S-400, I think there is not much flexibility. I think that because it is not simply a piece of military equipment, it is a reiteration of our long-standing association and friendship with Russia, and I don't think we are going to sacrifice that on the altar of a threat of American sanctions. And if the Americans actually move towards sanctions on the S-400, then it will create a lot of difficulties in future relationship, including in the defense domain, where we have been doing fairly well because we've been buying American equipment also. We are about to sign the Industrial Security Agreement, which will allow transfer of sensitive technologies in the defense domain. So I think there are issues, and I think the Americans will find, Americans are blowing hot and cold, and I think, as they do usually. But I think we know it, and we have seen through all that. But India is not going to sacrifice, as our ministers have said, its own national interest just because we want to please America. That should be very clear to the Americans, and I think they know it.
Okay, so the message has been sent loud and clear by India to the United States. If I could come to Maruf Raza right now, you just heard what former Ambassador Chakravarti had to say. Maruf Raza, he's saying that the deal with Russia, as far as the S-400 Triumph goes, is non-negotiable. There should be no flexibility on that front. Is that how you also see it? Reports that are coming in from Osaka do suggest that this perhaps was not discussed between President Trump and Prime Minister Modi. And the messaging is quite clear. This is a new India. It's going to stand by its decision.
Well, I think the Modi government has made it clear on more occasions than one that as far as this big deal with the Russians is concerned of about $5.4 billion or thereabouts for the S-400, 5 sets of these air defense missile systems, this deal is not going to be renegotiated, neither is going to be set aside. Whatever American pressure that Mr. Trump and his team try to put on us, because in the same breath, the Americans have received from India another order for new weapon platforms. Over the years, the Americans, as you would know, have become India's largest defense supplier in terms of the new contracts that have been given to the Americans, which is now in excess of $17 billion. This compares very favorably with what was America's position maybe 10 years ago in the Indian Defense Bazaar. And at the same time, India is open to more things being pawned by the Americans into India, whereas the technology that they are giving us is not exactly strategically top-notch. I mean, in terms of what the Russians have given us in the past and are willing to give us, like the nuclear submarine, the S-400, also, joint arrangements for making missiles and fighter aircrafts. This is quite clearly in a different league. But you see, the American problem is a bigger one. The American problem is twofold. One is that Mr. Trump wants to have a win-win situation with tariffs and trade with every country he's dealing with. So it's not just India. He's gone and sort of made noises which are negative vis-a-vis the Japanese, which is a long-standing ally of the Americans. We are not allies. And the problem is that the Washington elite is not very good at differentiating between what is an ally and what is a strategic partner, which is what we are. The other aspect is that the Americans always put across a kind of position that you're either with us or against us. They're not able to handle a country of India's size and India's independent opinion in foreign policy, wherein we are not entirely in any one person's camp. And that was the case even with the Russians when we had very strong Indo-US friendship arrangements and which lasted for 20 years or more. So the Americans must understand that India has its own approach. For example, look at Iran. As the ambassador has just brought out, I mean, we have been arm twisted into not buying anything from Iran in terms of oil, we were one of their big markets. And the Americans are going to fill up for that with shale gas and other export items into the Indian market. Two, the Americans also don't want us to
but let's stay with the G20, Maru, but let's
from Venezuela,
Maru,
from
for now,
we've had long-standing relations.
Correct. And we've had relations with Venezuela, and things are a big mess in Venezuela. We all know about the economy being in shambles, the failed coup that had been attempted by the United States. We'll touch on all of those points again. So, Hasani Haider, if I could come to you now. Let's just show that handshake between Donald Trump and Narendra Modi again to our viewers. And so, Hasani, just coming into this program, I was reading your column in which you've talked about 5G, you've talked about the Huawei issue. That is another point between the two countries where the United States wants India's support. In fact, when Mike Pompeo was in New Delhi for that one day to set the stage for this grand meeting between the two heads of state, he spent a bit of time talking about how the United States and India should partner each other on securing 5G networks, that India should behave a partner the way Japan has. But the signaling that we're getting from Osaka is that India wants to have its own decision. It wants its own security systems, whether it's an answer to WhatsApp or its own solution to Huawei, and that's just the way it's going to be.
I think essentially what Prime Minister Modi delivered today to Mr. Trump and at the BRICS was a positive statement. What he was essentially saying on 5G was sidestepping the entire Huawei issue. So in the readouts, we have not seen anything. I mean, Mr. Trump might tweet in the next 24 hours and we might know more. But in the readouts from the White House and the Ministry of External Affairs, what we understand is Mr. Modi didn't even discuss Huawei. He discussed 5G. He said there is technology. India is going to be the world's second largest market. Let's collaborate on technology between Silicon Valley and India's telecom industry. So he kept the message positive, but essentially what he's telling the US is their demand that India cuts Huawei out of its 5G trials even before it goes to trials is not something India will take because the US says so. India may take that decision, but that's down the road. The same goes for data localization, where the US has been pushing for India to ensure that its guidelines are not cleared on data localization. And what we saw instead over there was a real rift on the two sides, because Japan and the US seem to come together at the Digital Economy Summit today and say that we want the free flow of data. Japan and Prime Minister Abe in particular have initiated the DFFT for the data free flow and trust, flowing freely with trust. Whereas India has stood with BRICS and said that no, data is in fact the wealth of a country, particularly a developing country, and we don't intend to just let it go free, hence the data localization laws. The two sides are fairly divergent there, Nayantara, and it remains to be seen what happens. You know, I don't know if any of these positions, including what you said earlier about S-400, are firm positions. A year ago, India had said very clearly on Iran that we don't even recognize US sanctions. That was in June of 2018. In June of 2019, India has for the first time come out and said, yes, we have reduced our oil from Iran. In fact, they have zeroed out oil intake from Iran since May the 2nd. So none of this is non-dynamic. It may change tomorrow. As I said, a tweet from Mr. Trump could change everything as well. But for the moment, it looks like India is certainly on this issue, on technology issues, not just going with the flow, as they say.
Yes, and that seems to be the messaging that's coming in from Japan, that Narendra Modi and India's diplomacy is not going to be just going with the flow. This is a new India, as they want to keep saying, and they're going to stand by their decision on what's best for the country, something Piyush Goyal said in Parliament too when Mike Pompeo was, like I said, in New Delhi. Rupa Chand, if I could now come to you. So we saw India reiterating its stance on contentious issue going into the G20. We had a tweet from Donald Trump criticizing India's tariff regime. But today he's promising a big trade deal coming against the backdrop of several irritants. What could this big trade deal be? We've already been, we don't have the GSP anymore. India has lost that privileged status. Having said that, we should put it in context. It's not as big as the bilateral trade that does exist between India and the United States. But having said that, there are irritants. We're perhaps going to see a lot of that pan out at the WTO.
Okay, so firstly, let me say that, I think this is just a lot of posturing. I'm not really very sure what could be this big trade deal, because given what's been going on with the retaliatory tariffs, the withdrawal of GSP, my concern actually is the other way, that whether it sparks off further increases in tariffs on other labor-intensive products which India is dependent on for the US market. So actually, I do not see a positive side to this in terms of some mega trade deal emerging. Where India has often had, some discussions about a trade deal is actually in the services sector, because there's a lot of mutual interest on both sides. One is with regard to the visa issues, the IT industry, e-commerce, then of course the retail, etc. So on both sides, investment from their side and trade interest, export interest from our side, there's a mutual sort of benefit that could arise. But given the current contentious positions of both, the restrictions on H1B and what's going on with the data localization and the e-commerce policy and their, criticism of our stand on that, I don't really see where the ground is for having any trade deal. So I don't even believe, I think that's really just posturing. And, to even say something like India has very high tariffs, when on one hand you're saying you're going to have a big trade deal, and then on the other hand you're saying that India has extremely high tariffs, what does that signal? And it's completely wrong on top of it. So I really don't know what to take from Trump's messaging at all.
Okay. So you think that this is all just posturing? Rupa Chand of the view that can't figure out what that big trade deal would be, considering so many irritants have still not been ironed out. Ambassador Chakravarti, if I could come back to you. So we saw that important meeting between President Trump and Prime Minister Modi. We've also seen a trilateral meeting between Xi Jinping and Vladimir Putin. You have said the S-400 is perhaps non-negotiable and India is not going to be flexible on it. But this is, of course, a very crucial meeting as well. 5G, Huawei, oil, geopolitics, the exercises, the military exercises also that we have been seeing. And let's not forget, the Treasury Secretary of the United States is saying 90% of the trade deal with China is almost done. And that will, of course, impact India too.
Well, I think if they can swing something on the trade, China and America, if they come out with that, and if Trump is, I don't know, hinting at a trade deal or a big something, whatever he said, then, and the Treasury Secretary saying we've tied up 90% of the problems, then we could probably see some kind of a, I won't say a free trade agreement, but some kind of a tariff arrangement where I think both sides open up their markets again and tariffs come down, etc. And then everything goes back to something like status quo or status quo plus in terms of market access, then I think things would change in the sense that we might go back to a situation where China regains its position as the world's largest exporter, and then India would obviously have to take that into account. The other thing, of course, would be that with China and Russia, India actually is probably on the same page as far as Iran is concerned, because we don't want any, destabilization in the region, and neither does China or Russia. Russia for geopolitical reasons, China for also the same reasons as we have, that is import of energy, oil and gas. So I think that is something that will be conveyed to Trump, that look, you can't sort of destabilize the region through war and things like that. The one hint that Trump claimed that he pulled back from, allowing the bombers to go and bomb something or the other in Iran is indicative that they might be sort of hold their hand till such time this summit is over and China and Russia can also get into the picture in terms of getting the Iranians. Iranians are also taking a tough posture. But till about yesterday, the Iranians actually did not cross that uranium enrichment benchmark, which was laid down in the JCPOA, the agreement which America abandoned. So I think there may be some elements of some compromise emerging, but I don't know. I mean, anything could happen with Mr. Trump being what he is, and he might tweet tomorrow that of something which will set off another chain of sort of speculation and events. So I think the trilateral meeting between India, Russia and China would have focused on that.
So, Hasini, I can see you smiling. I'm just going to come to you in a second. I'm just going to Maruf first. Maruf, when we talk about the new India, the new diplomacy, the new foreign policy that we are seeing, Hasini brought this entire point about how everything is dynamic. India changed its stance, for example, on Iran. Now, after that, you've had an election which has been fought with the main mudda, the main election plank also being national security. And even during the Captain Abhinandan situation, we all know how the United States perhaps played a role. Remember when we knew that there would be some good news coming? It had actually been revealed by Donald Trump when he was visiting South Korea. You're seeing India and the US also carry out naval exercises together. So having said that, yes, the relationship perhaps has been better than ever before. Perhaps there's also a time when America has needed India far more. Maruf, can you hear me? I think we've lost that connection with Maruf. We'll reconnect with him. So, Hasini, if I could just come to you. When we talk about the new India, like I said, it was Donald Trump who had revealed there'll be good news coming for India and as far as Captain Abhinandan goes when he was visiting Korea. That's the first time we got to know. And, then it all planned out and Pakistan announced it. So, having said that, the US perhaps needs India a lot more when you look at those naval exercises vis-a-vis what's also happening with China.
Well, I think we are living in a much more interconnected world. Who needs whom will remain to be seen, whether what you keep referring to as new India is actually something new, because I can tell you what is new and what has changed in the last few years. One is that Russia and China are today closer than ever before since the 1950s. The other is that the US now sees Russia and China as its central challenges. So there's a real divide between those two, and it is growing. In this scenario, India, which has, even when it gave up non-alignment, has stood by something called issue-based alignment or multi-alignment, is going to have to make very stark choices. It's no longer possible for it to say, I will take the S-400 from you and I will take something else from you, as it is attempting to do right now. As Maruf said earlier, in 2020, I think we will be importing about $18 billion worth of American military hardware. And then there's this $5 billion deal from Russia as well. But what I think both sides are now telling us is it may no longer be possible. The fear is not just that the US is going to stop India's purchase of S-400 or put sanctions on India. The fear is that the US will then say, we cannot give you other technology. It's the same thing with Huawei, where the US is saying those who allow Huawei into their networks will not be able to do business with American companies because we don't trust them. So what we're looking at is very stark choices, Nayantara. And I think in the next few months, India is going to have to make some of these very tough choices, either this or this. Does the US need us? Definitely. Who wouldn't want a market of 1 billion plus and the world's third largest economy, growing, and all the rest of that? But I think what we're seeing over here is some very hard bargaining going on, and we're waiting to see which one.
But so Hasini, practically, you're talking about. So Hasini, but practically, and you brought up this whole point of the new challenger, China and Russia together as being seen by the United States. Practically, how is India supposed to choose, right? Look at the relationship with the US, look at going beyond just trade and economic, strategic in nature, for geopolitical, for military, all of that, and technology transfer as well. With Russia, we have some of the biggest defense deals. And then with China, the other problem is its support to Pakistan. It's one big mess.
Absolutely, and maybe India needs to do some of these package deals as well. After all, India gave up so much on Iran. They've given up an 11% supplier of oil, cheaper oil than anything we've got from any other country. And we don't seem to be able to show much for it. Even the waiver on Chabahar has not served us very well. We had hoped that Chabahar would be our way to circumvent Pakistan. Yet here you have the US putting so many sanctions on Iran that nobody wants to do business and trade through Chabahar, so we may lose our investment there. So maybe India needs to do some of that package deal bargaining as well, and stand very firm on the things that are non-negotiable. At the moment, the US seems to have a laundry list of things it wants. So it wants you not to buy this, this and this. It also wants you to buy this, this and this from America, and it wants you to change this, this and this as far as its laws go, and we can go on talking about that list. But essentially, I think whether it is on trade or anything else, we are going to have to come to a place where we say, look, do we want to be partners or don't we want to be partners? And hence, there will be a package deal. I think we have to reject some of the transactionalism that Mr. Trump keeps talking about and say we don't want to be what the Australian Prime Minister said is nothing more than the sum of all our deals. We want to have a real partnership.
We want to have a real partnership. I'm going to give the final comment to Rupa Chanda. There are some strong observations that are coming in from Suhasini Haidar. How reasonable, practical is it going to be when we see the trade situation between India and the US at the WTO, for example? You were talking about how can we have a big trade deal when none of the previous issues are being resolved. Added to that, for the first time ever, the world is also going to start signing digital treaties.
Okay, so what I would say is that we have to really look beyond trade, and there are strategic partnerships possible with the US, particularly in the area of maritime security and infrastructure development. I think the resurgence, the emergence of China in the South China Sea, East China Sea, I think there is a strong convergence of interests on that front, on the geopolitical front, between India and the US, and the bringing together of Japan in this trilateral forum. This is an important strategic partnership because China is growing financial muscle in the region, it's growing claims in the region. I think a very we haven't really looked at the role of the private sector in India, Japan, US. There is this Indo-Pacific Infrastructure Forum. There are different forums, and we need to think of innovative ways in which these partnerships can be sort of leveraged better, because you can harness the private sector in this region and you can actually counterbalance China in many forums. So we have to think out of the box, not just this usual trade and investment mega deals and so on. So this would be my say. I don't think that we can really think of reforming the WTO, etc., and forming any partnership with the US or coming to terms, not with this current administration. On that, the India, Russia, China sort of partnership is extremely important, because that's where these countries can actually push more of issues of multilateral reforms at the WTO, in particular trying to safeguard the WTO dispute settlement system. They're advocating for a non-discriminatory, rule-bound, open trading system. That's where I think this other partnership is very important. But on other issues, as I said, maritime security, counterbalancing the Chinese influence in the South China Sea, etc., the India-US partnership is very important. So we have to take it issue by issue, and there are different forums in which we'll have to forge different sorts of partnerships.
So let's see how India finds those partnerships to make its position more dominant when it comes to not just trade but all of the other strategic affairs, how it can continue to call the shots. With that, I'd like to thank all of my panelists for taking the time out this Friday evening to join us here on the India Development Debate.